Okay, so we're live again, so we can cut. So, what made you get involved in mental health?
Um, that's a really good question. So for me, it was extremely personal because obviously, as you know, being my sister, you know that just about 6 years ago now, I lost my daughter to breast cancer. And that really took me on my own mental health and emotional journey. And through the things that I already knew as a nurse and the education that I had at the time, as well as just my own personal struggles with some mental health issues like depression, lack of motivation, again, stemming to depression. I was already a student and continuing on my higher education, and I knew that I was going for an NP, but I thought because I had always been an emergency room nurse, that it was just a natural progression where I would be what we call an acute care nurse practitioner. So I would manage patients in the critical care area. And when I was doing my clinicals for school, I found that although I cared about what was ailing people physically, that I was more interested in their psychological, their mental process, and how it really connected to their physical symptomology and the reasons behind a lot of the ways they think the way they think and the things that they do. And then I guess the final kicker for me was I really just found that I was not motivated to return back to my books, which were focusing on physical illnesses such as hepatitis, et cetera, et cetera. So I took about a week and I really did some self-reflection and, looked at my options. And I'm just like, I'm in the wrong area. This isn't what I'm supposed to be doing. And so I reached out to my instructor at school, my main advisor, and I said, look, I think I'm doing the wrong thing. And I think I'm better suited for mental health just because of my journey. So they said, no problem. Let's finish off the semester, which is what I did. And the very next month, they had me enrolled into the mental health nurse practitioner program. And boom, I started. And I just never looked back. And here I am.
Well, we had a conversation, you and I, yesterday, and I was fascinated. So I'm gonna go ahead and jump in. So I wanted to start with, as children, as babies, we go through certain phases. And if anyone out there knows about psychology, you've got your Freud and your other um, people that we look to. And so if you had said something about the id, and what is an id and how does that develop, and then go ahead and tell us about the different phases that we go through as children.
Well, in terms of psychology, for anybody who knows anything, Sigmund Freud was pretty instrumental in developing a lot of the psychological theories out there. We have a multitude of theorists, but some of the more prominent ones, such as you mentioned, Freud, he believes that within our brain, we'll refer to as our psyche, that we have the id. And basically, well, we've got three components. We've got the id, we've got the ego, and we've got the superego. And they all function for us in a different manner. But referring specifically to the id, we're born with, and or we don't specifically know, or it starts to develop relatively quickly after we're born. And basically the id deals with our primitive, our primal instinctual needs. We know that we need a basic set of needs even right after we're born. We need to be able to eat. We need nurturing. We need suckling. We need those types of things. And it plays an important part in our overall development, because in meeting those needs, just throwing really quickly out there, one of the other theorists, Maslow, he talks about our, basic needs that need to be met in order, for people to go on and progress. Well, food and closeness and bonding is one of them. And the id is quickly or, strongly tied to that, because with the id, again, it works with our primal our instinctual things, the things that our body knows that we need. It's already programmed in there. And the id also works to the point where it wants, it's rewarding. It wants to be rewarded, such as it wants satisfaction and it wants gratification, whatever that is, right now. So if you're hungry, you want to eat. And you know, as we continue to feel the hunger, we start getting those hunger pangs, we get a headache, we get cranky, we get angry, we get irritable, and we know that we need to meet that need, but maybe we are delayed in meeting that need. That's the id at work, pushing you, driving you to meet that instinctual need.
And then there's healthy ways, and then there's unhealthy ways. There's things that happen in childhood trauma or abandonment and things like that that leads to a malfunctioning of the id. Or, you know, we talked about coping and things like that, and how certain things malfunction after trauma and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, for people to have a broad understanding, you really need to understand more theorists other than just Freud, because there's like Erik Erikson, again, Freud, who's very instrumental. And these theorists, they came up with these particular stages that as people starting in infancy, we need to be able to progress through. And we need to progress through them effectively in order to end up where we are and become healthy, functioning individuals. And when we don't progress through those stages, or say, for instance, going back to the id, we don't get the bonding, and or referring to Erikson, you know, in his intimacy stage, if we don't get our needs met, then we develop coping mechanisms and they may not be healthy. So, and when they are not healthy and they continue for long periods of time, they basically become maladaptive. But it's all we know, because we're trying to learn how to survive based off of our instincts and the feedback that we get from our environment. Good feedback, bad feedback, positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, to bring Maslow back into it if you want. You know that, you know, if you beat something, a child, an adult, even a dog, a cat, an animal, whatever, if you beat them so long, you know that they're going to just instinctively cower regardless of what their environment presents them with. Even if it's love, initially all they know is cowering, so they may not be openly receptive and understand or comfortable and feel the love as you're trying to present it.
Wow. And then so moving on through the stages, is there a certain point where you should have developed through those? Is it like age 7 or something, and then you start a new series of development? Or
yeah, I mean, we have, different stages of progression. Even as toddlers, when we're first learning how to walk, or the toddler is exploring their environment. If we're not given a certain level of autonomy and encouragement, and healthy reinforcement, good or bad, then we become, for lack of a better phrase, we become stunted or shy towards our environment, and we're less willing to venture out and build our confidence. Especially if you have a parent or maybe a sibling that is overbearing and too overly protective. You have a mom that doesn't allow you to attempt to climb up on the couch by yourself for the first time for fear of you falling. You have a parent, or mom or dad or whatever, depending on who's taking care of you or raising you, who is too fearful to let you venture out into the grass in the backyard. So they keep you inside and they don't let you experience those things. So the very first time you're thrust into the environment, maybe for the first time at school, in preschool or kindergarten, and now you have this grassy area or this dirt area that you're presented with, you're not going to know what to do. You have not been able to socially interact with your environment, learn what is good, learn what is bad, what your limitations are, and build the confidence that you need in order to start and to continue to interact with your world, and or learn from that interaction of the world in either a negative or positive way, because this is how we find out, oh, this is good or this is bad. You know, if I don't ever let you near the stove when that burner is hot and tell you, no, 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 don't touch that, you could hurt yourself, or I don't ever let you near the stove as a child, you don't know what a stove is and you don't know that it can be hot and hurt you. So I have to encourage your interaction with, I should say, we need to encourage interaction of the children to interact with their environment, but yet teach them properly. This is hot, don't touch. Or it's okay that you fell, get up and do it again. You'll be successful. We just need to practice. So that applies to all stages of life, and that even applies to our social interaction and our development and bonding and building of peer relationships, which is why siblings, cousins, aunts, uncles, friends are so vitally important, because we have to continue on through those stages of learning. And if we are sheltered from them, then I don't learn the socially interactive skills on how to talk to you properly, or how to not be selfish and take everything that you've been taught to share a toy. I've not been taught that. So you are encroaching on my domain because it's all I know. So that causes me, let's say I'm the child, that can cause me to not develop through the next stages properly or the previous stage. And it will affect me in the long run because I've not learned the social skills or proper coping skills, or even how to rationalize or think concrete or formally how to interact and perceive properly my environment.
Yeah. So, okay. So let's say if you get traumatized at the age of 2 and you're in the, I don't know, one of those stages, can you kind of get stuck there? Like, do people get stuck in certain phases where they remain childish and immature? And
absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, take a look at, there's adults, again, go back to, any one of the earlier stages. Let's say you didn't have a loving, bonding, encouraging relationship with a father because the father was absent. So you missed out on that dynamic. If you had nobody else to fill the role, you missed out on that dynamic of one, building boundaries between a father child.
Hold on. Sorry, there's a weed eater. Fridays are bad, and we'll cut this out. Okay, go back to where you. So if you don't have a father and you miss out on the bonding.
You miss out on that bonding, so as a female, you miss out on that, that instinctual bonding, number one, with a parent. You also miss out on the bonding with somebody from the opposite sex. And I don't mean that in a sexual manner, obviously, when it comes to a father and a daughter or a mother and a son, but it's still a very vital, because they are a role model. And through our development of relationships with them, and or seeing a positive role model in a healthy marriage between a mother and a father, or, same-sex marriages, it doesn't really matter. If you don't have that modeling and that grooming, then you can be stuck in that phase and not healthily advance, so that when you become a young adult or, high school young adult, when you are confronted with struggles within that male, female, male, male, whatever relationship it is, You have not learned how to cope with them. You have not learned how to communicate or how to express, because you were never afforded that opportunity to develop those coping mechanisms, or to process through and think about, wow, why am I feeling very, very different about this? What is it? And you don't have that, again, that role model in order to be able to converse or bounce things off and to get feedback and learn from as you grow and progress, and be able to learn how to weed out the minutia, so to speak, of what's relative to your growing and what's not relative to your growing.
So then let's say that we're all grown up and we want to get married and get into these relationships and have children, but we had a missing father or a missing mother, or the mother wasn't there, or there was drug abuse, or there was alcohol, or there was something going on to where we were stunted and didn't learn things in a healthy way. And we get married, we get in these relationships. And we try to recreate our childhood, don't we? We try to recreate, or we try to find people to fill those roles, but we do it unconsciously. Why do they break down? If that's what we want, and we actually want like a fatherly figure, why does it end up breaking down? It just doesn't work sometimes.
Sometimes it doesn't work because even though we have obtained or attained what it is that we've been in search of, we never had it. So we don't know how to positively deal with it once we have it. We don't know how to properly be accepting of it. We don't know how to feel the feelings that it gives us. So it is unfamiliar to us. So it's scary. Anything in life, what is the fear? The fear is of, fear itself. It's the fear of the unknown. It's basically unknown because we've not experienced it. We don't know that when we're in that relationship and your husband, for whatever reason, let's say he yells at you. Okay, you've been yelled at by a mom or an aunt, but maybe you've not been yelled at by a father. So you don't know how to react to that. That takes you off guard. And you're like, oh, what was that? How do I deal with that? How do I deal with it? Bottom line, what was that? What did I do? What did he do? So your body, again, interacting with your environment, your body either perceives things correctly or incorrectly. Most of the time it's going to perceive things incorrectly. One, when you've never dealt with them before, you've never had exposure to them, and or you have minimal exposure, and you've never really been able to resolve and grow and process through and continue to develop your ego and your super ego, which are very also important as well, because they have to do with rationalizing things, thinking about them realistically and in an organizational manner. If you didn't learn those concepts and develop those skills from a young age and progressing into adulthood, how are you going to deal with them? The way you dealt with them as a child. And that is going to not necessarily be effective as an adult, and can at times be very, very childish, to the point of maybe throwing a temper tantrum because that's what you feel you need to do in order to get your way, because you are being presented with something that you are not familiar or comfortable with, or you just don't know how to deal with it. Or you are so self-centered because you've gone to the other end of the pendulum being raised, that every one of your needs was met by being catered to. So that is all you know. And that is what you learn to expect, because that's how you perceive your environment. So when somebody stands up to you and says, no, that's not how it goes, your first thought process is, yeah, that's how it's going to be. Because your id again kicks in and says, this is your instinctual need. You do what you need to do in order to get your gratification, your satisfaction, to meet your need. Numb. Wow. Or avoid your pain. And the pain is not always physical. The pain can be mental. You can have mental pain because you can't rationally process through something because you don't know how.
Oh my God, that makes so much sense. So let's talk about that for a minute. Um, when we start having, um, like, how would that begin to turn into to a mental health issue when you get older and something was, went array in your childhood, and now you're trying to deal with relationships, and then how would a mental health develop?
Well, obviously, our mental health, such as our physical health, it waxes and wanes, and it develops, continuously throughout life. Just because maybe you start off and you don't learn positive coping things, you don't learn how to properly interact socially with people and stuff, that doesn't mean that at some point in your life you can't learn those.
Okay, that's good.
So just because we didn't learn something in childhood doesn't mean that it can't be learned. It might take longer. We might have more resistance as an adult because we have free will and we want to do what we want to do. And if it's not gratifying to me immediately, then no, I'm not putting in the time and effort. But it takes work. You have to constantly, you have to self-reflect. You have to think about, why is it that I'm not getting what it is that I need? You have to stop and admit, wow, maybe it is me. Maybe there's something going on with me that I need to address and I need to fix, that I need to make healthy in order for me to be able to give back or function in a relationship. And again, that's any kind of relationship. It could be, mine and your sibling relationship. It could be a relationship with a cousin, a neighbor. It's a relationship nonetheless. But those coping skills, if I grow up in a home and I'm just yelled at 24/7, again, that is all I know. So when you're talking to me lovingly and rationally, I'm not comfortable with that.
Oh, yes.
You know what I'm saying? I'm like, you must want something from me because of how you're being very sneaky.
Mm.
It can cause people to be very paranoid. And it goes a lot deeper than that. But, just a quick example is you take schizophrenia, for example, and that's a perception. That's a portion of it is as a mental illness. Part of their issue is they perceive their environment wrong. And because they perceive it wrong, it can cause them to be suspicious, hence the paranoid. Because again, maybe, they didn't grow up in a lovey, touchy, feely home. That's another example. I'll give you an example. A husband and wife relationship. The wife, yeah, she grew up being told, I love you. There was an occasional hug, a pat on the back. So some things that lead to and indicate what love is and how, lovingness displayed to somebody else is. But there's not a lot of touch and feely. There's not a lot of that interaction for people to become comfortable with it. So now you're in a marriage and your husband is very loving, very affectionate, very, wants to hug you, feels the need to want to touch you and have that closeness with you often, but you didn't grow up like that. So you're not comfortable with it. So because he says, I love you 50 times a day, or, you're in the kitchen cooking, he comes up and he hugs you, or you're sitting on the couch and maybe you're embroiled in doing something for work or a book or something, and he just arbitrarily hugs you, you're like, whoa, wait a minute. What? I'm not comfortable with this.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to recognize your uncomfortableness and you have to admit your uncomfortableness, but not everybody understands why they might be uncomfortable. So you have to kind of go back to basics and be like, why am I uncomfortable with that? Did I grow up in a home where that happened all the time? And if you didn't, and you are thinking about it and self-reflecting, you could be, well, maybe that's why, could that possibly be why I'm not comfortable with it? Does that make
Yeah, and
sense?
then yeah, and then counseling starting right away, good therapy groups and things, talking with others. I mean, that's why women get together and talk in the kitchen and men go in the garage. But at some point, if you're getting too much uncomfortableness, or you're fighting too much, or there's too much stress, we begin to self medicate, and then that basically stops the like when we start doing drugs and alcohol, that will stop the reflection, and it will stop the need, or the desire to self reflect. Right? You just go
It
numb. And
doesn't. It doesn't stop the desire. Well, let me retract that. It can stop the desire, but basically it stunts it. It blunts it out, because it doesn't want to deal with it. It keeps you numb. We all know that when we are in a situation that we're uncomfortable with because we have never experienced it, or we don't have a lot of exposure to it. I'm going to take snakes for an example. I am terrified of snakes. I do not even want to ride my horse during the warm months because I might be exposed to a snake out in the elements. Okay. So that, I understand my rationale, and I take steps to avoid that, because my id, I want to gratify and I want the satisfaction and the love that I feel from horseback riding, but I'm fearful that I will come across a snake, not because my horse is going to spook or throw me, but if my horse spooks and throws me, now I'm down on the ground with the snake.
right.
So I'm going to take measures to not feel that uncomfortable situation or put myself in that situation. Same thing with medicating ourselves, self-medication, so to speak, alcohol, marijuana, cocaine, or whatever. We use those measures to not feel whatever it is that we're not comfortable feeling, whether it's physical pain, whether it's heartache pain because of a loss of a job, a relationship, a child, a friendship, whatever, a pet. We turn to those because we find that through experimenting with them, which is why one of the stages in, becoming addicted, one of the stages is referred to as the experimental stage, because we experiment. And we know through the experimentation that, oh, wow, I'm starting to feel uncomfortable. I'm going to have a drink, because that drink makes me not care
Yeah.
about that uncomfortableness. And I don't have to feel what I am not comfortable with, or I don't have to deal with him sober and be uncomfortable because I can't communicate properly. I can have alcohol and get that liquid courage in me, and then I'm freelance Sally, and I can just say whatever that comes to my mind, but it may not necessarily be what I'm feeling or what I'm thinking, because I don't know, because I'm not allowing myself to work through the processes, and or I didn't get a healthy balance and progression growing up to be able to be comfortable in my own skin and do that without something. But basically, again, the id, you're trying to stunt the uncomfortable situation. You don't want the pain. You don't want the mental pain. You don't want the physical pain. You don't want to feel the emotion, because the emotion is not comfortable for you.
So, something that comes to my mind is internal conflict. Internal conflict. A part of you wants this interaction and this understanding, but it scares you so much that you're not ready. So you want it, you're ready. It's just like breaking up in a relationship. You know it's a bad relationship, you want out of it, but you know that you love that person, and you kind of still want in it. And it's just this internal back and forth. Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. What's that conflict stemming from, where you can't even make up your own mind? You think you make up your mind, but it's not. I mean, what is that?
There's a lot of factors from it, but again, going back to the stages of development, the psychosocial stages of development as we progress, For everybody, it's going to be different. It could be fear of abandonment because you were a child that was abandoned by your parents, and you ended up in the foster care system. So you go in search of that stable, loving, caring relationship. But again, as I mentioned before, once you have it, you don't know how to cope with it. So you have that fear. But yet you want it. Oh, I'm going to try it again because I know that it's what I want. A lot of it has to do with comfortableness. I'm going to take for example, okay, I'm in my early 50s. I'm very comfortable within my relationship. If for some reason it was to dissolve for whatever reason, I don't know that I would want to get involved in a relationship again. Because I am fearful of something new. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Even though I may want it, I may not take measures to pursue it because, I have to go through all that work again. And, I look at past relationships and, all of my past relationships have failed. Why would I want to set myself up for failure again? It's our psyche, and again, coming full circle, you have to understand a lot of times, and this plays more into a specific therapy that we use in mental health called cognitive behavioral therapy. And basically what cognitive behavioral therapy is it helps an individual to change their distorted thought processes, because that's what they are. They're distorted. Do I know that if my horse throws me and I end up on the ground, that snake is going to slither up to me and want to bite me? No, I don't know that. But my mind is distorted because for whatever reason, I have an irrational fear. I know why I have a fear. I know when I was in the Army and I climbed into my sleeping bag when we were out in the field, there was a snake in my sleeping bag. I know why I'm fearful. I didn't get bit. I got away. But I'm still very fearful.
Yeah.
Because my thought process, even knowing what I know and having the education I have, I'm not a perfect human being. Therefore, my thought processes can still be distorted. I know what I want. I know I want this healthy relationship. I'm going to keep going back to it. I'm not sure why. It's about my thought. It's about a person's thought processes.
Yes.
Are they realistic? Or again, are they distorted? But until you sit down and are finally ready to sit down and evaluate and look at why is it that this is the way it is, then you're not going to move forward. You're going to stay stunted. You're going to regress. And you're just
not. That makes sense.
You're not going to further develop.
Because like after the breakup, you sit there and you can either just move on and not deal with any of it and just be gone. And then in your next relationship, you're going through this and your next partner is saying, what's wrong with you? And you're like, I don't know, but I'm processing and, I'm all confused. Or like me, I will just take the time and I will just continue to rethink and to understand so that when I do move on, I move on with in a healthier way. But I mean, there's times where I guess the word is regress. Constantly regressing. Well, maybe it wasn't that bad. Well, maybe I could try again. Well, maybe I still love them.
Because we were familiar with it. We were familiar with it, and we don't have to put a lot of effort into it because we knew what to expect.
But now, how does trauma, okay, so when you got into that sleeping bag and that snake was in there, did it somehow traumatize you? I mean, we can be traumatized by the littlest things. I mean, seeing an accident or seeing death or seeing something. How easy is it to get traumatized? And then let's go into like being traumatized as a kid and how that turns into like the Jeffrey Dahmers and the different type of serial killers and the different types of adult things that happen from trauma.
Again, depending on when the trauma happens, obviously the earlier on in life, because again, starting from infancy, we rely on others to meet our needs. And when those needs are not met, that's traumatic. That as a child, if you're hungry and you're not being fed, that's traumatic. And people's instinctual needs to survive start to come out, and you will survive any way you see fit, because that's all is survival mode.
Yes.
And again, that's not to say that because, you didn't bond with everybody successfully or whatever, that's not laying the groundwork that you're going to become a serial killer. There's a lot of different things that go into that. But if you notice, when those types of things come about, what is the first thing that people, whether it be doctors, psychiatrists, lawyers, the legal system, what is the first thing that's focused on? Let's look at their childhood. How were they raised? What were they raised in? What was their environment? And dollars to donuts, I'm going to say 99.9% of the time, practically, there is a specific traumatic episode in their life, and or an onslaught of traumas, rejections, abuses, something of the nature, but also coupled with what could potentially be going on in the brain chemically. Because, we function off of different neurotransmitters. Our body, as perfect as the human body is, it's not ultimately perfect, and things go wrong. You can have a chemical imbalance that, if that is not identified, there's no way to help fix it through medication and or through different types of therapies. You don't always need medication. You can learn positive coping mechanisms and ways to deal with trauma, not necessarily just by taking medication, which is why, therapies, different therapy modalities are so important and have such beneficial things in people's lives. But again, you mentioned Jeffrey Dahmer. We know that Jeffrey Dahmer was arrested for killing people, as well as eating them, cannibalism. He, at a very younger age, as we now know, as they went back and looked at his life and stuff, he was exhibiting from an early age signs of trauma. Parents had, if I remember this correctly, parents had divorced. That's traumatic. That's traumatic for a child. And father remarries. Okay, another trauma. How well did they help him cope with it so that he could cope with it as a healthy individual and develop positive coping mechanisms? What age was he when it happened? If he had already developed his thought processes to the point of, this is who I am, and, who are you? I mean, that's typically how a lot of kids, if it's not done in a healthy manner, deal with divorce and the step parents, that step ugliness, so to speak, because you're fearful of them. Because what happens a lot of times with step parents, they reject their mates, their children. Oh no, I'll love them as if they were my own, but that's not necessarily true, and then you start getting these little, experiences where they're not being treated as well as they said that they were going to treat them. So again, referring back to Jeffrey Dahmer, he just had those continuous things. So he went in search of other ways to find gratification and satisfaction, not in healthy manners. He got into the thing where he was abusing and murdering and mangling animals. And that's like where it progresses. He started hanging out with individuals, that felt that they didn't belong, such as he felt he didn't belong. He didn't have those close bonds. He lost his father, so to speak, to a new wife. And then they ended up moving away. So he didn't have that opportunity to learn to continue through those younger adolescent, teenage, young adult years, to learn to continue to work on that father relationship. And he turned to other things, again, to get gratification and find different ways to give him what he felt that he needed. Now, how does one correlate taking a cat and sticking a wooden stick through it and, internally physically hurting it, ultimately causing its death? How does that gratify somebody? Only the person can answer that, but it gives them an outlet. That is anger. It gives them an outlet. Let's take it, for example, somebody who cuts. I don't know if Jeffrey Dahmer was a cutter, but there's a lot of people out there that unfortunately turn to being cutting. They're not getting a need met. They're feeling some kind of pain, an emotional pain, a void. They are feeling something that they don't know how to deal with because they've never been taught how to deal with it, how to rationalize it and work through it or seek help. But we're like pressure gauges. We need to blow off. Mm-hmm. We need to release. It could be a healthy release, such as a good cry. I love to cry, especially if I have a lot of pent up. Crying for me is just it cleanses me, and it feels. Yes. Does it make me feel better? Yeah, it makes me feel better. Did it fix the problem? No, but it clears my mind. It allows me to just release the energy and maybe come back to it and refocus about what am I missing. So going back to the cutters, that's why they start to self-mutilate. They start to cut or burn, whatever their self-mutilation tendencies are, because it's a release. It may not be a healthy release, but it's a release nonetheless. And over a period of time, if that is the only type of release that you have, because you don't have someone to talk to, you have people that lie to you or let you down, they don't withhold their, they don't give you their word and hold up on their word. You don't have family, you don't have trusted, whatever the reason is, over the long haul, that is going to be your coping mechanism because that's all you know. And now it is nothing but a maladaptive coping mechanism because you don't know any other way.
Right. And we had talked also about going to groups like AA or NA. And we had talked about how sharing each other's experiences, you can get some help. Like, for instance, that person did this and it worked for them, or, just sharing and telling our story and is a big release. It's a big release, but a lot of people have suffered so much shame. They're never ever really going to want to tell what happened and unless they tell really super close people.
That's because of society.
So you're dealing with the shame and the stigmatism and the stereotyping and things like that. So a lot of people are walking time bombs, just trying to release in alcoholism or addictive behavior or porn or whatever, whatever there is as a release. And we had talked about, like, are they looking at me? Do you think that they know, do I look like, this, or do people think I'm gay, or,
That's why they turn to those substances, because it numbs the feeling and it makes them, I don't care what you think of me. I don't care if you look at me and see nothing but a grungy person. I do care, but I'm going to continue to drink or use heroin or this or that, because it makes me not care what you think. I can be within my own little world. I have my own gratification through my euphoria that I'm getting from the substance. It makes you not care.
Okay, so it makes you totally numb and not care. But then when you come down off of it, you're like, now I just made another big mess.
That's why you constantly keep going back to it, because eventually it wears off, and now you're still faced with the same problem that you were stunting. The problem is still there.
And then you're making it worse. You're making it worse. You're losing friends, you're losing family, you're losing jobs, you're hitting rock bottom. And then once you hit rock bottom, like you had said, well, what makes people want to stop and get help? And you said when they reach rock bottom. So, there's some functioning alcoholics that just sip a little, just enough to cope. and get through life and just cope. And then there's ones that just spiral down. So and the groups can only do so much. So you and I had talked, well, what about your relationships? I had asked you, so when you go to AA, you get people that are similar and have similar stories, and you talk about similar things. But when you're in relationships, that doesn't always work. And the reason is because, say, like, you have one person with trauma, and you meet someone with the same exact trauma, and initially you're like, yeah, we're perfect for each other, right? So you start this relationship, and all you do is fight, and you're not getting any better. Initially, what you thought was going to help you is now worse. Can you explain why we don't always work with people who have similar trauma and things?
Well, one of the reasons can be is when you are someone who similarly has, the same type of traumas, maybe you're at a point in your life, or something has happened and puts you at a point in your life where you want to fix it and you want to be healthy, and you start taking those steps towards that healthiness and that change. The other person is like, well, wait a minute, they're not there. They're not in that same realm most of the time that you are. Sometimes it happens and you get lucky. You both can go through it. You can progress and you can develop this wonderful, loving, healthy relationship together and go through it. But that's the exception and not the norm, because that one person, the other, person in the relationship, they may not be at rock bottom. They may not have hit their rock bottom, or they may not be able to know what their rock bottom is. So they want to stay in those unhealthy measures and not cope. Therefore, the other person is going to find it easier to resort back to, that was comfortable. It's easier just to do this because I don't have to go it alone. I don't have to venture out into the unknown by myself. I don't have to put the work into it. I can just stay back here in this dysfunctional relationship, but yet I'm in a relationship and there's somebody there and I'm not alone. And they know what I've been through. It's not healthy. You can get healthy together.
Right.
But you're better off being with somebody who doesn't have that same or similar background, who has those coping mechanisms, maybe not all of them, and maybe not in a perfect manner, but can help create that encouraging, nurturing, loving environment to help you progress out of the dysfunction. Encourage you to do that therapy. And you know what? We need to focus on fixing you first, getting you healthy. I'm going to be there for you. I'm going to support you. I'm going to encourage you. And then when you are ready, then we can integrate me into, say, for instance, counseling with you, or you start off in couples counseling together. I mean, there's going to be times where you get counseled together, and there's going to be times where you, as the individual with the issue, are going to be counseled individually, because unless they focus and work on you, you're never going to get to where, it doesn't matter how good the partner is, you're not going to get to where you can sustain the positive coping mechanism, things like that over the long haul.
Right. So one person could be from a loving environment, and then meet someone who's looking for that loving environment. But the person that's not used to it is now rejecting it. It's because it doesn't feel right. And so now you've got this constant battle of, well, let's do this. And then that person just wanting to fall back into that dysfunction. Let's come back out of this dysfunction. Nope, let's go. Let's keep. So it's a constant struggle. But unless that person is ready, like you said, it's hit rock bottom and is ready,
they have to want it.
Huh? They have to want it.
Have to want it. And that has to be their ultimate motivation. They have got to want it. They've got to fight to get it. And once they get it, they got to fight to keep it. They got to keep working it. You got to work your program, whatever that program is. And I don't necessarily mean, AA or NA or whatever. Once you get healthy, it's too easy to get unhealthy again. But they have to want it. That partner cannot want it for them.
It's like, and that's key. That's really key. So, and
it's like smoking. That smoker has to want to stop. Doesn't matter if the wife or the husband or the children want it. That person who's doing it, who is partaking in the behavior, they have to want it, or nothing in the world is going to work.
Exactly. Exactly. And you don't know when you wake up one day and say, okay, I'm ready. But it is an ongoing thing. Mental health is an ongoing thing for everybody, not just somebody who was traumatized or whatever, because even coming out of a relationship and breaking up with someone, it causes trauma, and it causes depression, and it causes anxiety, and it causes all these things where you never had this before, but now all of a sudden you have all these issues. And so at what point, can you not handle it on your own, and where you should seek help? I mean, is there signs?
Anytime from in my opinion and from my professional perspective, anytime you are thrusted into a situation to experience something you've never experienced before, that should be the trigger to tell you get help. And I don't mean go to a psychiatrist. I don't mean start drinking or anything like that, but go in search of a support group. Go in search of a friend that has maybe experienced this before. Go in search of your spirituality, your religion. Again, we know that there's many religions out there. Look for some type of avenue for help. Even if you don't know where to go, so many businesses nowadays, not enough in my opinion, but so many of them, especially, bigger businesses and stuff, they offer employee assistance programs that can help you get help. Again, even if you've never experienced it before, again, I refer back to me, a very good example, 6 years ago, I've never lost a child before, but I got to a point where, wow, I'm not motivated, and all I want to do is sleep, and I am passionate about being a nurse, but I don't want to work, because every time I go to work, all I get exposed to are cancer patients, and, and this and that. And so all of these things, and even as a nurse and being educated and knowing if it was one of my patients or a family member, what I would be telling them to do, I hadn't quite got there yet, because it was too painful to stop and think about, why am I feeling this way? Well, I knew why I was feeling that way. Obviously, it's the loss of my daughter. But anyway, long story short, I got to a point where I'm like, okay, I'm new to where I'm at. I know that my work has an employee assistance. I know also, as a veteran who gets care through the VA system, I know that I have mental health. I know that there's counseling and stuff out there, but I have to initiate it. But I was afraid to initiate it. I reached out to a friend. Has she lost a child? Absolutely not. She hadn't. She's never even had a child. So she doesn't know. But I reached out, because my thought processes were somewhat distorted initially, and I sought guidance. She's like, you remember, we do have the employee assistance program, or, hey, you're a veteran, how about you contact mental health? So again, it doesn't matter where you reach out to, even community programs, whether it be, the health department, or even just calling a counseling service. you know, maybe you don't have insurance and you don't have the money to go and pay for the counseling service. But even if you call a business, they should be able to help guide you and give you a resource. You know what? Call this number. They can help let you know what's available in the community. If you want something bad enough, there are ways and avenues to find information about it. You just have to ask. That's the problem. People are afraid to ask because it's the stigma of society. Now,
Yes.
when I reached out for help because of my depression, did it mean that I have a mental illness? No. It meant that I was going through life.
Yes.
And I was experiencing a stressor. And what I did with that moment would either ensure or set me on the road to success, or it would hold me back. And it could eventually maybe potentially take away everything that I had worked for. You've got to, you know, a person also needs to evaluate what is their motivation. What is their motivation? What motivates them in life? Again, you know, you know, at the time, you know, I had only had the one granddaughter, but I still have a son. I still have a son to live for. You know, I still have family. I have you as a sister. You know, every individual is going to be different. You know, maybe somebody, you know, loses a parent and they're in nursing school or they're in medical school. And their motivation is, I got to make mom or dad proud. You know, I've already started on the, you know, they've got to find their motivation. Your motivation is going to be different than my motivation, et cetera, et cetera. So you've got to find your motivation. If you've got nothing to be motivated about, you've got yourself. If yourself is not worth being motivated for, then that's a good indication that maybe there's some serious issues if you are not healthy enough to consider yourself enough motivation.
Right.
Sense. But there, if you want it, there's an avenue to find the information.
And so just listening to you, it is so important because people need to know we're all in this together. And we meet people every single day, whether it's friends, colleagues, family, new members of the family. We all should be huddled together to make sure that we're all doing okay, and stop judging and stop humiliating and stop you know, and the victims, you know, stop blaming the victims, and because now you're creating a whole nother set of mental health issues. And I just want to say, stop judging. We have to stop judging because we're all being affected from everybody. So there's not, with the death of my niece, your daughter, it affected everybody, and everybody had to deal with it in their own way. Very hard for everybody. So we needed to like realize that and start supporting each other more. And you and I talked about these support groups and things that they only can go so far, you know. And then we need to be able to recognize each other's when they're depressed, or hey, they're not answering their phone and it's been 2 weeks, you know. What are some of the signs that us as friends and family members, you know, can look out for, and what can we do on, you know, a personal level, which, you know, to indicate whether, well, maybe my mother or whatever does need mental help, you know, maybe she does suffer from depression. What are the signs and what can we do?
You know, a big sign, you know, would be somebody who has withdrawn from their life in general. Say, for instance, if they're a very active person, you know, a very social person, and they start withdrawing from their life, they don't start partaking in things that, you know, they find joy in, whether it be going to the gym, whether it be meeting once a week, you know, with their quilting group or whatever it could be. You know, when they stop participating in life, stop participating in activities that they enjoy, that could be an indication. You know that every Tuesday you guys go to dinner and you notice that they don't eat what they're eating, or they don't bother to eat at all, or maybe they only have one glass of wine, and now by the end of dinner they're at glass number 4. It could be, you know, drinking more alcohol. They could just be on edge. They could be very irritable. They could be, you know, just angry, and they could have very fast pressured speech, you know, which is not normal for them, because normally they talk, you know, very very cool, very calm, very, you know, steady. It could be something as small as inflections in their voice. You know, you haven't seen a friend for 2 weeks, and when you see them, they look like maybe they've lost at least 20 pounds. You know, all of those kind of things can be indications of depression. You know, sleeping all the time, not wanting to get out of bed, not showering. Every time you've seen them for the last month, they're disheveled. You know, they look unshowered. They don't look put together. Their clothes are stained, and you know that that is just different than what their normal presentation is. You know, it can be some of the most subtlest things that would be an indication of, you know, somebody suffering from depression. Even avoidance of places. And I'll give you, again, I know I use my example of, you know, losing, you know, my daughter, but those are the experiences that I have and that I can draw from, that maybe somebody can relate to their own experience. Obviously, you know that, I mean, we live here in Nevada, but at the time that this happened, we lived in Arizona. And very frequently I go back to Arizona, to that particular place. But probably for the first year after her passing, every time I got within 15 miles of that town, my respiratory rate increased. I started getting palpitations. I just started crying. I just started becoming very, very anxious. Mm-hmm. That could potentially, if I didn't effectively learn how to deal with it and expose myself to it continuously and learn how to deal with it, that could prevent me from ever returning back there, which would not be healthy, because I have friends there, I have colleagues there, and I have a purpose for the reasons that I go. But anyway, what I was alluding to is, not only did I start experiencing those experiences, but I wouldn't drive down the main street, because I knew the main street of that town, the room in which she passed away in, faces right there at that stoplight, and one direction or another, I would have to see that. So I would either go to the next exit, or I would take a roundabout way when I came into town, so that I didn't have to look at the hospital that she passed away at. But I shouldn't have bad memories of, I didn't want that to be the only memory that I associated with that facility, because I have wonderful memories. I have wonderful nurses that continue to work there, and that's where I started my nursing career, and it was phenomenal. So avoidance of life, avoidance of places, because it's a stressor and it triggers things. That cause people, it's the triggers. You've got to be able to stop, be willing to take the time to identify what your triggers are, what's triggering you, and work to effectively cope with those triggers, so that, again, it's not maladaptive and you don't do everything you can to avoid it. Because, I mean, who knows? It could have got to the point, if I'd have done nothing about it, that I developed a social phobia, and I was just afraid to even go out in public, and I never left my home. I mean, you know, those things don't just automatically happen overnight. Oh, I'm never leaving my house again. To some degree, you can. I mean, COVID really kind of, you know, set everybody on their eardrum, and did cause some of those similar types of situations out of fear. But education, if you educate people and you educate them properly, even with COVID, education, I don't mean lies, I mean education, you know, you got to give them the tools to be able to make an informed decision. So education and resources.
I really wanted to dive into the coping skills, because like when I ended my last relationship and we lived in the house, I can't go down that street or that area or that Ross or that Starbucks or that grocery store or those cross streets without starting to go, oh God, I don't want to go. I don't want to know. I don't want to be reminded. It's like
You
we
need
don't
to.
want to be reminded.
You need
But
to.
but it's the slow, gradual, okay, I'm going to go ahead and go to that Ross. You know what? I'm going to go to that Starbucks. And you're going like this and you're looking around and it's like, you're okay, you're okay, you're okay. I mean, that stuff's real. And that's just simply a relationship breaking up and having to cope with the different things. And people don't realize that, there's some people that just, they want to just hate on you and like they don't understand that there's two sides of the story, that there was two people involved and that two people are affected. And so you can't like point your finger at this one and point and create hate and outcast and shunning and all the crazy stuff that society does when they choose sides, and things like that. You don't understand that both people are suffering in a relationship break. And somebody even said it was like a death, the process of a breakup. And it could be a marriage. I mean, a long-term marriage or whatever. People have to be more understanding. And that's the point that I'm trying to make here is number one, helping people realize, hey, stop the shame, stop the blame, start understanding more. And number two, how do we help others cope? Like, I know that I had to take a lot of time just reflecting and pushing the world back. Like you said, some people aren't able to come out of that. Some people sink down in depression. They don't leave their house and they never recover. But eventually you have to find the motivation to push yourself and go back and say, no, I'm okay. But how do we encourage others and help others?
Let me stop you right. Let me stop you right there, because that's part of the misconception.
Okay.
You have to, as an individual, and society has to be accepting of it. We have to, as an individual, we have to be okay with saying, I'm not okay, but that's okay.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to work to get to a point where I'm okay again. And society needs to be, that person's not okay, but look at what they're doing to try and become okay.
Yeah.
How about I encourage that?
Yeah.
And help them to become okay again and not shun them because maybe they did have depression. I mean, because that's a big thing as a nurse, and I was very open and honest with my patients when opportunities presented itself, which, they present often, in just talking or even talking to friends or whatever. And they're like, well, are you okay? No, I'm not okay, but I'm going to be okay because I'm
beautiful you say that. That's beautiful you say that.
To be okay, because we need to learn to be able to cope, and we need to be able to learn how to deal with the new normal. Everybody's normal is different, how do I begin to continue to live without a force in my life that I've had for the last 30 years? I did not have the answers. I don't have the answers, but I do know what was in place at the time that was beneficial. And the things that were in place at the time were, I had a great support group of friends, medical friends and non-medical friends. A great group of friends that helped me walk that journey that she went through, that saw what life for me was and knew when to be like, you know what, you are not yourself right now.
Right.
What's going on? Reach out, follow up. I knew enough that when I started withdrawing, I knew what could eventually happen if I didn't find that motivation and sit and think about what do I have to live for and identify what the motivation is, because honestly, at that point in time, I was not my own motivation. But I quickly became my own motivation because I was already in school. And one of the reasons, not the main reason, but one of the reasons I went back to school when the kids were in high school, one was to get to the career that I wanted, but was to serve as a positive role model for my 2 children that were in high school about, wow, look at what my mom did, where she came from and where she's gotten to. She was a later learner. She went back to college. She wasn't a college degree person. Gosh, maybe I can do that too. Provide some motivation.
Yes.
That as a single parent, look at what my mother has accomplished. I mean, that's one of my biggest things. And I mean, anybody who knows me, when we have any kind of interactions, even on social media, one of the things that commonly is a theme in things that I talk about is, man, I hope she's proud of me. I hope my kids are proud of me. Or, I really want my grandchildren, to see, maybe she didn't grow up healthy, et cetera, but, she became the healthiest individual that she could. That was the motivation. And, I'll be honest with you, going through that whole process with my daughter and looking back, even 1 year later, actually even, a week and a half after her passing, when we had her funeral, one of the biggest impacts that I had on me was the amount of people that showed up at her funeral services from across the state of Arizona.
Yeah.
And that was such a proud, shining moment for me, because I was like, wow, I'm the mother of an individual who reached out and touched so many lives in so many different ways. So that gave me a different kind of motivation, unknown to me at the time. So all of these things, they didn't, just come to me as an epiphany overnight. It's been a 6-year process that only now, through my continued education and understanding of the psyche to the level of understanding that I have, continuing to work as a nurse and all of those experiences. And I highlight the word experience, because I got a lot of positive role models. I got a lot of encouragement. And when I didn't know where to go, I knew I had people to go to that could help me find where to go.
Yeah.
And some of the most instrumental people were my bosses at work. My one boss who called you that one day and you came and got me and we took off to Arizona. I mean, that is a big part of the problem, other than the stigmatism, the financial disparities that people have, the societal issues, lack of insurance, lack of availability. They don't have the support networks.
Mm-hmm.
They're afraid to ask for help.
Yeah.
We have to get to the point where and I'm going to use veterans, 22 a day, commit suicide.
22 a day?
Look at what society did to the Vietnam veterans when they returned. Look at the stigma we have placed on the men and women who wrote a blank check for their life, knowing that they could go to war at any point in time and that they may lose their life, but they loved their country and their family, and their desire to give to freedom was enough to where they wrote the blank check that life could be the payment. We as a country, we treated them horribly, and we're only now 30, 40, 50 years later, any war veteran, any military veteran, we're only now learning as a society the shame that we put them through, and how we were the contributing factors to some of their mental things. Granted, some of their mental distresses and issues are stemming from being in war, from long deployments, from isolated deployments, from special forces, where you have such a high, level of, the word escapes me, not Secret Service, but your security levels are such that the job that you do, nobody can know where you are. We are herd animals. We need socialization.
Yes.
We need people. So when we are isolated for short periods of time or long periods of time, it can have in certain individuals devastating effects because
Mm-hmm.
people need people.
Right, and that's what I was trying to say. And Tanglefoot, she always says
The village.
it takes a village. It really does. And we've lost that. We don't even talk to our neighbors, and it's a shame. But and speaking of shame, um, shaming one another, shaming victims, shaming is really devastating to self-esteem. And once your self-esteem is shot, things can just spiral down really fast. What is the message? How can we stop the shaming? I mean, what is it that we need to know?
We need to recognize that we're doing it, such as an individual needs to recognize when they have a problem. We need to recognize that that's what we're doing.
Right.
We need to be remorseful of it, and we need to be motivated to change it. And
Yes.
we need to stop giving lip service to it, and we need to actually get involved, and we need to
Do
take
it.
action, and we need to not just provide lip service. We need to put action behind changing it. But education is the only way that we're going to do it, and we're going to have to do it one person at a time, one individual at a time.
Right. There's things like bullying, and there's internet bullying, and there's social media shaming. I mean, there's so much going on. It's just a wonder anymore. People like you are very instrumental, and you're starting a program. And go ahead and remind me of what you're doing with this new program. What's the name of it and everything?
Um, Well, I mean, not so much a program, but it's basically just starting, my own business. And in starting, my own business, I am, partnering with somebody else who is already established within the community, and we're pairing together to be able to offer mental health services and expand in mental health services to people that don't have access to it. As you know, I mean, obviously these formats, Zoom, Skype, these video platforms, this is utilizing technology to make medical care, whether it be mental health or physical medical care, to make care available to people in a format that has not been available to them before. So many people have smartphones that, even though they may only have a phone and I'm sitting behind a computer, I can still, do medication management for them, or I can meet with them and evaluate them and have a discussion about their mental health, and talk to them about the signs and symptoms that they're having, and discuss whether, with them about whether they feel that they want to utilize medication as medication management to help with the symptoms, because you don't cure mental illness. Mental illness is not to be cured. You manage the symptomologies of it. If they're depressed, you use medications to help remotivate them. But I mean, that's just a very quick and simple, blanket statement. But giving resources and helping to make care more accessible, I guess would be the best way to explain it. We have a vision. We're not sure where that vision is going to go or 100% what it looks like, but we know that together and with the other people that, we're coming together, we can expand, and we can expand in places that nobody else has bothered to expand in. And I'm talking rural areas, and that's our focus, is going to be rural areas and making things accessible to people that it's not right now accessible to.
And do they have to have insurance for this? Is there any help out there for people with no insurance and no support? People that are just at their wits' end, and how do they get help?
It's very difficult. because, if they don't have insurance, then more than likely they're also financially strapped as well. That's not 100% the case, but, where there's a will, there's a way. I personally, at some point in time, I don't know how I'm going to do it yet, but I want to be able to, there's lawyers out there that work pro bono.
Yeah, pro bono. I was going to say that.
Everybody needs to make a living, obviously. But eventually I would, part of my vision is being able to establish something to, even if it's like, once a month, you give of your time in a community and you can meet with people and you can talk and you can hand out packets of community resources, and things of that nature. There are, small pockets, where that does happen nowadays, but it's few and far between. It's just really, getting the word out. And again, I don't know, how I would do it. I don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but even being able to offer, some kind of channel that they can click on the link and log into, but yet we can obviously keep very private because we have to keep, privacy, because people's medical issues and confidentiality and stuff, that is not to be breached whatsoever. Finding a format in which we can, make it available and say, for instance, advertise it. Hey, on this day, we have mental health individuals that are going to be available. Click on this link. You can go into a private chat room and you can ask questions and you can discuss things. And maybe they can help you, direct you to the resources that, you could utilize. Again, I don't know exactly how it's going to come out. I just know that we need to start doing things and we need to start building programs. And we need to come up with something concrete, and we need to find people that are going to be willing to help support these kind of programs and back them and make them accessible. But it's going to be a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to start with initially. We're going to start small, and it's going to have to happen through word of mouth and small little things here and small little things there. So I don't know 100% what it looks like yet, but eventually we'll get there.
Sounds amazing. And so just to touch base on some of the key things, we're all motivated by different things. I, for one, I'm really good at motivating people. And so therefore I can motivate myself. I can motivate myself to get up out of bed every day when I don't feel like it, or if I'm sad. I can motivate myself, but not everyone can do this. So we reach out and we need each other's support. So motivation, motivating each other, encouraging, not shaming, listening, and all these things we can do. And what am I leaving out as far as, like, say, you named the things to look for, like if, you don't hear from somebody, or if they quit doing the things they love, what are some other things we can do to help get them, started on some treatment?
Kim, again, the main thing is going to be they've got to want it. They have to want it, because we can want it for them all they want, but unless they speak up and they reach out, everything we do is not going to matter. They've got to want it.
That's really important. Otherwise we're fighting. We're up against a brick wall. If they don't want the help, we can't help.
Right. And in saying that, the caveat to that is, if a person wants help, they're going to reach out for the help and they're going to get the help. If they don't want the help, and that's hard for us as humans, we have to be able to say and be okay with, that's your choice. If you don't want help, that is your personal choice, because as an adult, you have the right to make, in my opinion, a poor decision. That is your decision. All I can do is simply leave you with the thought of, if you ever change your mind, you know where I am.
Yes.
We have to be okay with, if they don't want help, they don't want help. And that is their right. That is their freedom to want that. And that's okay. It's not okay, but we have to be okay with it. Even as a nurse, Um, Again, I refer back to the situation with my daughter. I knew her wishes. I knew what she wanted and what she didn't want. And I had to make her a solemn promise if she ever ended up on a machine to not keep her on a machine, because that's not her. The mother in me knows this. Let me keep this. I don't care if this is what she's got. This keeps her with me. But the nurse in me and the logical part of me and my education tells me, you advocate for the patient. You abide by their wishes, despite what your own beliefs, morals, prejudices, and things are. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what I wanted. This was her journey. This is what she wanted. And I had to be strong enough. We have to be strong enough to uphold and abide by their wishes. If they don't want treatment, they don't want treatment. Okay. But if you change your mind, I'm here. If you don't want to get off crack cocaine, okay. But don't blame people that they're not helping you. You were making this choice to not take the help. There's a big difference. There's a big difference. They have to want it. They have to reach out for it. They have to fight for it. But if they don't want it, we have to be okay with saying,
yes,
I think it's a bad decision, but it is your decision, and I support you in whatever your decision is. I won't take the blame for your decision, but I support you, whatever your decision is. But if you ever change your mind, I will help you.
And two things are important too. Number one, to be the good role model, number one, without forcing your way on them. And number two, to not enable. Where do we go from supporting to enabling? Where do we draw the line? Or where does,
Everybody's boundaries are going to be different. My boundaries are going to be very quick and very, very quick, because I know in my mind what I do and I do not put up with. Bottom line, my boundaries are going to be different than the next person's boundaries. You have to set boundaries, and the minute that person violates those boundaries, you have to be strong and diligent in the consequences that they have for violating that boundary. And they have to know that they mean business, and that you can't set the precedence for that boundary violation. Because once you accept it, they're going to be like, whatever.
Yes. And it just crossed my mind that the more you're like, okay, so you draw the line in the sand here and they cross it, and you're like, okay, I'll draw the line back a little.
You can't.
Obviously you just, you need a little bit more whatever. And then they cross that line, you draw the line back. They keep crossing. Then finally you're like, okay, you do it again. I'm going to do this. And you don't. And it's same with children. And you have to do that in every day, at work, in your relationship. Those boundaries are so important. And if you're going to make those threats, you got to be able to keep them. And in the long run, it might help, because look, if I say, don't do this, or I'm going to break up with you, and you go ahead and do it, and I break up with you, the next time, maybe you'll think twice. So maybe something that I did by being a good example and holding my boundary, I might be helping them in the long run. You know what I mean? I might be upset about it, but if we could look positive, like I said, we're all in this together, and every move, it's like a chess game. Every move that everyone makes affects everybody. So we just have to remember that. And again, I love the fact that you said we can't just be a lip service. We have to do these things. It's fun to talk about and everything. It's another thing to actually practice these things and be good role models. It's very hard in this day and age to be a good role model and not even get shamed of that. You're providing a good role for somebody, and you're getting shamed because now that person is rejecting you for your efforts and making you the bad guy. And so and then the person that's trying to help gets victimized. It's a battle, and so people need to become more aware and do you have any last words, what you want to say on what I just spoke of?
Um, Again, even if an individual doesn't know what their individual motivation is, try and find your motivation. And if you can't find something that motivates, stop for a moment and realize that yourself is worth being the motivator. Do it for you. Don't do it for
Yes.
others. Do it for yourself. Um, when you feel lost, reach out, educate, and if you're going to set a boundary, hold yourself to the boundary, and and be staunch on it, because at the end of the day, we have to be accountable to ourselves. And again, one person at a time, one step at a time, and it takes a village. That is not an untrue. It takes a village to raise a child. It takes a community to raise a community. Bottom line, we have a lot of uphill battles, and we have a lot of things to fight against. But again, the human race, it's worth fighting for.
Well, this has been a really, really, really great talk with you. I do want to have you back on. I mean, I have so many questions. We didn't even get into the serial killers and all the macabre stuff and why people do this, that, and the other. For the paranormal, people get attracted to paranormal and things like that. That's going to be for part 2. And I just wanted to thank you again. And I do want to do a shout out to anyone out there that is experiencing anything at all. You can get a hold of Candi or get a hold of me, and let's work together and let's do this. Thanks again, Candi, for coming on.
No problem. Thanks for having me. It was fun.
It was good fun, good fun. So I'm going to sign off. Don't go away. I'm going to end the broadcast, and I want to thank everyone for watching another Tunnel Talk with Candi.